I'm Marvin Lieberman, and this is a video abstract of my article with Gwen Lee and Tim Folta titled Entry, Exit, and the Potential for Resource Redeployment. In this article, we talk about a benefit that an established firm may enjoy when it enters a related business. It's a dynamic benefit of relatedness that goes beyond the well-known effects of synergy. The benefit comes by reducing the cost of failure. If the new business is not successful, the firm may be able to quickly and cheaply exit the business and redeploy its resources back into the larger firm. In effect, the ability to redeploy resources makes it possible for a diversified firm to do low-cost experiments in entering new markets. Amazon is a company that has been masterful in doing these types of experiments. Here's what Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos wrote in his 2015 letter to Amazon shareholders. Some decisions are consequential and irreversible or nearly irreversible, one-way doors. And these decisions must be made methodically, carefully, slowly, with great deliberation and consultation. If you walk through and don't like what you see on the other side, you can't get back to where you were before. But most decisions aren't like that. They are changeable, reversible. They're two-way doors. You can reopen the door and go back through. So, what provides the key to reopen the door? We argue in this article that in the context of market entry decisions, the key to reopening the door is resource redeployment. If you can easily redeploy resources from the new business back into existing businesses of the firm, then we have a two-way door, easy to go back and forth. Whereas if it's difficult to redeploy resources, we have a one-way door. And we argue that it's hard to get back through, and therefore we should be very careful about going through this door in the first place. We connect resource redeployment with work in economics on sunk cost investments under uncertainty. If it's easy to redeploy resources from the new business back into the existing business, or alternatively just to sell those resources, then the sunk costs are low. Whereas if it's hard to redeploy those assets, then the sunk costs are high. Moreover, we connect to work and strategy on related versus unrelated diversification. If you've entered into a related business, then it's likely to be easy to redeploy resources back into the larger firm, whereas if the firm has entered into an unrelated business, it's probably hard to redeploy and the sunk costs are likely to be high. Let me give you two examples. Both are failed entries made by Procter and Gamble a little over a decade ago. Olestra was a fake fat. It was a product that tasted like fat, but passed through the human body without being digested, so it had no calories. You can imagine that P&G thought this might be a very attractive product. Unfortunately, it failed pretty much from the start. It was clear, but it took Procter and Gamble a full 6 years to exit from that business. Our second example is Olay Cosmetics. This was an extension of Procter and Gamble's Olay, Oil of Olay skincare line. Again, it was clear from the start that this was not succeeding, but P&G took only 2 years to exit. We would argue that this Oil of Olay extension was a low-cost experiment. It was low cost because P&G could easily redeploy its resources back into the larger firm. P&G had CoverGirl Cosmetics, it had Max Factor Cosmetics, it could move people back into those lines, and it could take its manufacturing facility and reallocate that facility to make CoverGirl and Max Factor Cosmetics. We suggest in the paper that entry into businesses like this with low sunk costs that are related is justified even if the expected returns are modest and maybe even negative. So even though the expected return is negative, if there's some chance of a very high return, you might still want to enter that business. So this entry into Olay Cosmetics, we would argue, even though it failed, was highly justified for Procter and Gamble. Whereas Olestra was a costly experiment, perhaps justifiable for P&G, but certainly had a very costly outcome for the firm. It was a long time to exit, and the reason for that was that Olestra was unrelated to P&G's existing businesses. P&G had to build a factory costing well over $100 million that was specialized to make Olestra. And when the product failed, it lost that investment. It had people at Procter and Gamble doing research on Olestra who really could not be very effectively utilized elsewhere in the firm. So if you are facing this sort of unrelated business entry with high sunk costs, the expected returns need to be very large to justify entry. Let me formalize this a bit more with this diagram. You see here on the left Olay Cosmetics with high ability to redeploy. And in a business like this, as soon as the expected return falls below the cost of capital, you pull the plug on that business and redeploy resources. Whereas in the case of Olestra, with these high sunk costs, even though the expected returns are falling well below what you originally hoped for, you get trapped in that business for a while. And this is purely rational to stay in that business even though you're earning less than the cost of capital. That's because you've got these high sunk costs. And ultimately, if that return falls low enough, you get out of that business, as they did in the case of Olestra. Now, there are a couple of implications here. One is that if you're in a business like Olay Cosmetics, where the sunk costs are low, you want to do a lot of experimentation. You can easily enter and exit businesses. Whereas if you're in this zone with high sunk costs of unrelated businesses, you can get trapped here in this entrapment zone. And you want to be very careful about entering businesses like this. Now, it's easy for me to say that logically, rationally, we show in this paper, you want to do a lot of experiments when you've got related businesses. But it turns out that, well, that's an effective strategy. Organizationally, it's difficult to do. Many organizations find it hard to provide the incentives that enable this sort of behavior. But Amazon has been pretty good at it. Let me read to you what Jeff Bezos wrote in addition in his 2015 letter to shareholders. As organizations get larger, there seems to be a tendency to use the one-way door perspective on most decisions. The end result of this is slowness, unthoughtful risk aversion, failure to experiment sufficiently, and consequently, diminished invention. One area where I think we at Amazon are especially distinctive is failure. Most large organizations embrace the idea of invention, but are not willing to suffer the string of failed experiments necessary to get there. Building on Bezos's comments, let me close with 4 perspectives on the study. The first is a managerial perspective, that entries into related businesses should be viewed and designed as low-cost experiments. Another is an entrepreneurship perspective, that greater ability to redeploy resources from failed entries gives diversified firms an advantage over startups. And we certainly see this in the case of Amazon and other firms that are able to actually implement what we argue firms should do in our article. A third is the corporate strategy perspective. Internal redeployment of resources enables intertemporal economies of scope, which are different from the benefits of scope typically known as synergy. And finally, we have an economics perspective. What we've done in this article is extend the literature on sunk cost investments under uncertainty to address implications for multi-business firms. Let me leave you, particularly managers, with one final thought. That is that firms should assess their exit strategy when planning their entry strategy. That exit strategy and entry strategy go hand in hand, and the key to all of this is resource redeployment. If redeployment is easy, managers should do a lot of experimentation and risk-taking, whereas if redeployment is likely to be difficult, managers should be very cautious about entering. So I've covered the general ideas in our paper. In the article, we're much more formal. We have a mathematical model. We do data analysis. So we develop these arguments even further. I hope you enjoy our paper. Thank you.